coming to you today from Ashtabula, Ohio. It's about 50 miles northeast of Cleveland, right on Lake Erie in the northeast corner of Ohio. It's right along the train tracks that go from Cleveland all the way up to Buffalo, New York, through Erie, Pennsylvania. And it was here in this small town, which today has about 20,000 people, that the worst train disaster of the 19th century in America took place on December 29th, 1876. And I'm standing right now in the parking lot of the Ashtabula County Medical Center on Lake Avenue, right in the heart of Ashtabula. And just about a quarter mile south of me are the railroad tracks, which lead to the site. And I'm going to take you to a couple of the sites associated with that train disaster and talk a little bit about the history and about what happened. But right behind me here is the historical marker that indicates the spot, which just down the street you can see a bridge where the tracks run over the road, and it would be just to my left, to the east of this road, where the actual disaster took place. The tracks are still in use today, obviously a different bridge, but let's take a look. Well, behind me you can see the Ashtabula County Medical Center, and that hospital exists, and it is just beyond, it's actually on the property where the historical marker is. The hospital exists because of the Ashtabula train disaster. See, there was no hospital in the town of Ashtabula in 1876, and so as survivors were pulled from the wreckage of the train wreck, they were taken into private homes and there treated because there was no hospital. And in the aftermath of that event, the need for a hospital was realized here in this community, and so this hospital was founded as a direct result of the disaster of 1876. I'm standing just to the east of the site of the bridge where the train disaster happened. The train disaster actually began before that day in 1876, when the design of the bridge was first conceived of. And the owner of the company that controlled this line in the bridge actually didn't really like the design of the bridge. It was an experimental design. It wasn't something that had ever really been done before on that scale. But they went ahead and approved it anyway. And of course, we know the result of that. What happened that night in December of 1876 was that there was a driving snowstorm, a blizzard in fact. There was a ton of snow already covering the tracks. And so there were two locomotives, two engines that were pulling the 11 cars and 160 or so passengers and crew of the train. And as they came from the east, I believe they were headed from Buffalo toward Cleveland. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that was the direction they were going. They were headed in the direction behind me toward the bridge. As they crossed, the man driving the lead locomotive could hear the cracking of the bridge, and so he actually hit the gas, so to speak, and tried to get across as fast as he could. And he made it across with the lead locomotive, but the train, beginning with the second locomotive, fell down in and crashed down into that ravine below, just to the west of here. And most people survived the crash. In fact, most of the deaths occurred afterward. People were trapped. There were fires because of the oil lamps aboard the train. And it's a horrible thing to consider, but most of the people were cremated alive in the fire. Among those who were on board that train who perished that day, one was, I believe her name was Mary Burchard, and she was a cousin to the sitting governor of Ohio at the time, Rutherford B. Hayes, future president of the United States. And she died aboard that train, as did Philip Bliss and his wife. Philip Bliss was a hymn writer. He's best known as the man who wrote the music for It Is Well With My Soul, one of my absolute favorite songs. That's an incredible story in and of itself that's worth looking into, the story behind the writing of that song by a man named Horatio Spafford. But Philip Bliss actually survived the crash, heard his wife screaming. She was trapped inside, went back in to rescue her, and neither one of them were ever seen again. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let you see some of the sights up a little closer. We're going to go take a look at the site of the crash, and then we're going to head over to the cemetery where the remains of those who couldn't be identified were laid to rest. So I parked back. There's a Little League baseball field, maybe a quarter to a half a mile away from the site of the train disaster. And I went ahead and parked there, and there's a beautifully paved trail you can see here. It's probably a good 10 feet wide enough for bikes, even larger things if you wanted to. And there's actually people camping back in here. You can walk out right to the riverbed. I was actually walking around. I'll show you some scenes. I was actually standing in the middle of the Ashtabula River, which is very low right now, and you can actually walk right across it. But this trail leads right up to the site of the train disaster, so we're headed that direction now. To be perfectly honest with you, as I stand here in an absolutely beautiful and tranquil spot, the only real sound is the sound of the water that's running quietly past me here. And behind me is the modern bridge made of heavy amounts of concrete to support the weight of 4 sets of train tracks that run across there. But it's hard to believe that on this spot 140 years ago that nearly 100 people lost their lives, many of them trapped in a twisted metal and wood of crashed train cars and unable to escape as the fire consumed the train and eventually their bodies. It's hard to wrap your mind around how horrible this scene must have been on December 29th, 1876. But today it's peaceful, it's quiet, it's beautiful. But it's a lot to take in. It's a tough spot to get to, but it's worth your time if you're ever in this area to take the quiet walk here. There's nobody else around. I haven't seen a soul since I parked and I took the walk. It took me about 10 minutes to walk here. I actually heard a train sounding its horn as it went across. It's a lot to contemplate that happened here. I'm in Chestnut Grove Cemetery, beautiful cemetery here in Ashtabula, and behind me is the monument that was placed in the 1890s to mark the mass grave where at least 25 unidentifiable victims of the Ashtabula train disaster were buried. There are 25 names on the monument, and then at the bottom it says, and others whose names could not be obtained. So it's always possible there were people on board the train that nobody knew were on the train, but they do have 25 names here, and they were brought here and buried in this beautiful location. It's a very well maintained monument. You can tell that this is something that people are very dedicated to remembering, and that's important for this area that they do that. Well, as in all such disasters, there was an investigation to see exactly what happened and why the bridge collapsed. And very quickly, the investigation centered on 2 men, Charles Collins and Amasa Stone. They were the 2 men primarily responsible for the design and construction of that bridge. And it was, again, as I mentioned, something that was deliberated for a while as they debated on the design of the bridge, but eventually they approved the construction, they built it. The investigation centered on those two men. Charles Collins actually went and testified before the committee that was responsible for the investigation, and then after going home from testifying before that committee, took his own life. He's buried just behind me in this crypt. It says Collins on the outside. I'm perhaps 50 yards from the monument, which you can see there just by my car. Not very far away at all. 2 years later, Amasa Stone also took his own life, the two men that both felt the heaviest weight of responsibility for the disaster that took somewhere between 92 and 97 lives, depending on the source that you read. Aftermath of all of this, Chestnut Grove Cemetery here in Ashtabula is considered by those who keep track of such things to be one of the most haunted cemeteries in America. Whether you believe that sort of thing or not, those who do consider this a prime location. Charles Collins, the folks who died in the disaster, some of the reasons why, but that's something you can study up on your own. But for now, this is all I have to share today. Thanks for being a part of this. And I do this not to be macabre or in any way creepy or any sort of thing, but I think that people need to be remembered for things like this. And so I just take this time today to dedicate this to all of those who lost their lives that day in 1876. Thanks for watching.